Good morning. This is TVP World. You're watching World News. I'm your host, Benjamin Lee, and these are the latest headlines. U.S. President Donald Trump says his 28-point Ukraine peace proposal is not the final offer, as Western leaders work to respond ahead of emergency crisis talks in Geneva on Sunday. Meeting on the sidelines of the G20 summit in South Africa, European leaders warned that the plan needs major changes before it can serve as a basis for ending Russia's war. Trump confirmed on Saturday that Ukraine has until Thursday to respond to the U.S. proposal, though he signaled that an extension is possible. The plan, announced on Friday, resembles long-standing Kremlin demands and would require Ukraine to cede territory and limit its military capabilities. At the G20 summit, European leaders, including Emmanuel Macron, Germany's Friedrich Merz, and the UK's Keir Starmer, said the draft needs additional work, stressing that any agreement must provide real security for Ukraine and for Europe. With Washington reportedly boycotting parts of the G20 agenda and tensions rising over the process, leaders say they remained far from reaching a final agreement. Voters in a Serb majority entity of Bosnia and Herzegovina are choosing their president today amid fears that separatist tendencies could dismantle the peace architecture that has held the country together since the 1990s Balkan Wars. A snap election was called in the semi-autonomous Republika Srpska after its outgoing pro-separatist president Milorad Dodik was removed from office. Joining us now from Banja Luka, Bosnia, is Pavel Trzaskowski. Pavel, so what do we know about the election so far?
Well, Ben, I'm standing in front of one of the polling stations in Banja Luka, as you mentioned, the de facto capital of Republika Srpska, one of the constituents of Bosnia and Herzegovina. About 2,000 such places are open today across the country for people to vote in presidential snap elections. And the polling station behind me is the one frequently attended by Milorad Dodik, a long-time president of Republika Srpska and the man behind today's election. As you rightly mentioned, at the beginning of this year, he was given a sentence by the Bosnian court, a sentence banning him for 6 years from holding public office. Initially, he defied this ruling, and additional UN peacekeeping troops were sent to Bosnia soon thereafter, but eventually, sometime in the summer this year, he conceded, and that paved the way for snap elections that are being held today. There is no doubt as to whom Dodik's vote will go today, because Banja Luka is full of banners with him shaking hands with Sinisa Karan, whom he appointed to continue his policies. He is almost certainly guaranteed to continue secessionist policies of Republika Srpska. And Karan has 5 contenders in today's presidential race, but one of them is giving a serious shot of winning. This is Branko Blanusha, candidate of the opposition Democratic Party, also supported by other opposition parties. His eventual victory does not guarantee harmony in Bosnia and Herzegovina, but it could bring some extra stability, as Blanusha is seen as a less of a hardliner when it comes to national politics of Republika Srpska. Ben, back to you.
Thank you so much for the update. And of course, experts are saying that this might be a bellwether election that will kind of showcase how the Republika Srpska's election is going to go going forward. Thank you so much for the update. Appreciate it. Now, as questions swirl over who is driving the reported 28-point peace blueprint for Ukraine, America's top diplomat has moved to cut through the confusion. Marco Rubio says the proposal did originate in Washington, building on Russia's input while also incorporating what he calls ongoing contributions from Kyiv.
The peace proposal was authored by the US, and it is offered as a strong framework for ongoing negotiations. It is based on input from Russian side, but it is also based on previous and ongoing input from Ukraine.
As the U.S. ceasefire proposal for Russia and Ukraine gains global attention, leaders from Europe and Ukraine have pledged to revise Donald Trump's 28-point document. Speaking to TVP World, former Slovakian Defense Minister Martin Sklenár said the points most likely to face changes are those involving territorial concessions and amnesty for war criminals.
There are several things that need to be redrafted or reconsidered in the plan. Certainly from a European point of view, from a Ukrainian point of view, the most obvious ones are the territories and their management after the plan, the security guarantees or the security limitations that Ukraine will need to fulfill once this plan potentially goes into implementation. Then there's the issue of possible prosecution of crimes that happened in the full-scale invasion and in the war in Ukraine. There's a lot that needs to be discussed. Certainly, each and every of the stipulations of the plan really deserves a second look from what we have seen so far.
Air traffic at Dutch Eindhoven Airport in the south of the country was halted for several hours on Saturday evening after multiple drone sightings. Dutch Defense Minister Ruben Brekelmans wrote on X that the police and National Gendarmerie were on site investigating the incident. 2 hours after the first disruption, air traffic resumed. The defense minister called the use of drones to disrupt flights unacceptable, adding that action must be taken against it. The Ministry of Defense had taken measures, though Belkemans said that they are not yet able to share details for security reasons. On Friday, the Dutch military used weapons against drones seen above the Valkel Air Force Base, northeast of Eindhoven. The leaders of the 8 Nordic and Baltic countries pledged continued support for Ukraine on Saturday as the country faces pressure to sign the U.S. proposed peace deal. The declaration comes as Ukraine and European allies work to coordinate a response to the 28-point plan to end the war presented by U.S. this week. In a statement released after a call with Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky, the country said Ukraine has continuously shown it is serious about the peace and commended Zelensky for his efforts. The leaders say they support solutions that respect Ukraine's sovereignty and will bring Ukraine and Europe greater security and stability. They added that Ukraine remains ready to negotiate and, as stated by President Zelensky, is working on the document prepared by the United States. You can find more on our website, tvpworld.com. The COP30 conference in Belgium closed with a fragile deal that boosts climate finance but sidesteps the core question dividing delegates: how to phase out fossil fuels. As tempers rose and Latin American countries pushed back against what they called a science-blind compromise, Brazil's presidency tried to steady the room, insisting that climate ambition has not been lost, only postponed.
COP30 closed in Berlin with a deal that left delegates both relieved and frustrated. Brazil steered through a compromise that increases climate financing for developing nations, but pointedly avoids any mention of fossil fuels, a gap that many say undermines the urgency of the moment. Acknowledging the disappointment in the room, Brazil's COP30 president tried to reassure the delegates that the summit has not lost its sense of purpose.
We know some of you had greater ambitions for some of the issues at hand. I know the youth civil society will demand us to do more to fight climate change. I want to reaffirm that I will try not to disappoint you during my presidency.
But frustration quickly resurfaced. Colombia, Panama and Uruguay argued that a climate pact without language addressing fossil fuels ignores science. Sierra Leone criticized unusable adaptation indicators. The EU pushed for stronger wording, while oil-producing nations refused any reference to fossil fuels. In the end, Brazil issued a separate side text to prevent the summit from collapsing. One clear gain was financial support. Wealthy nations agreed to triple their contributions to help poorer countries cope with rising sea levels, severe storms and extreme heat. COP30 ends with a fragile compromise and a signal that the hardest choices still lie ahead.
Polish Minister of Internal Affairs and Administration, Marcin Kierwiński, said Poland expects Ukraine's intelligence services to ensure that a failure to inform their Polish counterparts about a wanted person outside Ukraine's borders will, quote, not happen again. His comment follows a foiled sabotage plot in Poland carried out by a Ukrainian national on Russian orders. Marcin Kierwiński also said Poland's Prime Minister Donald Tusk already spoke to Ukrainian President Volodymyr Zelensky about this issue during their latest round of talks. One of the suspects in the sabotage plot is a Ukrainian national previously sentenced in absentia by a court in Lviv for preparing a sabotage act on a local drone factory. Kierwiński added that if Russia recruited saboteur leaves the country, they should be marked with an Interpol notice. Last week, a section of railway track on a Warsaw-Dorohozhsk line was destroyed by an explosive device planted by saboteurs on orders from Russia. The damage forced a passenger train carrying 475 people to brake rapidly to avoid a catastrophe. Polish officials called the act a state-sponsored terrorism. Following an agreement between Washington and Minsk, 31 Ukrainians were released from Belarusian custody and allowed to return home. The 31 individuals who were freed has been convicted of criminal offenses, according to Belarusian state broadcaster Belta. Thanks to the deal between United States President Donald Trump and his Belarusian counterpart Alexander Lukashenko, the prisoners received presidential pardons, were put on a bus and taken to the Ukrainian border. Lukashenko, a close ally of Russian President Vladimir Putin, has freed several hundred prisoners since mid-2024 as he seeks to mend relations with the West after years of sanctions over his human rights record backing for Russia's war in Ukraine. President Trump this month named a special envoy to Belarus and tasked him with negotiating further releases. Slovenians head to the polls on Sunday in a nationwide referendum that will decide whether the country becomes the latest in Europe to legalize assisted suicide for the terminally ill. The legislation has already been approved by Parliament but now faces a binding referendum after a challenge from conservative groups. The proposal would allow terminally ill adults experiencing unbearable suffering to seek assisted suicide, with safeguards that include approval from 2 doctors and mandatory cooling-off periods. Supporters say the measure would spare patients needless pain. Opponents, including Slovenia's Catholic Archbishop, call the law unjust and inhumane, arguing it violates Slovenia's constitution, which states that human life is inviolable. For the law to be rejected, a majority must vote no, with a turnout above 20%. Slovenia would join countries such as Netherlands, Belgium, Canada, and Australia, which already permits euthanasia. President of Ukraine Volodymyr Zelensky and First Lady Olena Zelenska commemorated the victims of the Great Famine at the Holodomor Victims Memorial in Kyiv on Saturday. The memorial honors the tragedy of the Soviet-orchestrated famine that devastated Ukraine in the 1930s.
The President and the First Lady attended a commemorative prayer service with officials and military personnel. Holodomor Memorial Day is observed annually on the 4th Saturday of November. It is estimated that the famine took as many as 10 million Ukrainian lives between the years 1932 and 1933. Poland, the European Union and the United States recognized the Holodomor as a genocide perpetrated by Soviet authorities against the Ukrainian nation.
The White House is reportedly weighing a new step in its pressure campaign against Nicolas Maduro, using U.S. military aircraft to drop leaflets over Caracas that advertises a $50 million reward for information leading to the Venezuelan leader's arrest. U.S. officials told the Washington Post that the psychological operation has not yet been authorized.
According to the newspaper, the proposed leaflet drop will coincide with Maduro's 63rd birthday on Sunday. It is a part of Washington's escalating strategy against his government. The Biden and Trump administrations have repeatedly increased the bounty for Maduro, which now stands at $50 million for information leading to his arrest or conviction. Reuters reports that the US is planning additional covert operations as President Trump escalates his fight against what he calls narco-terrorists tied to Caracas. Since September, US forces have carried out strikes on suspected drug-carrying vessels in the Caribbean and Pacific, killing at least 80 people. The Pentagon has also deployed the aircraft carrier USS Gerald R. Ford and other warships to the region. Meanwhile, Bloomberg reports that a sanctioned Russian tanker, part of Moscow's shadow fleet, turned back twice from Venezuelan waters after crossing paths with the USS Stockdale, highlighting the rising tensions in the Caribbean.
And with that, we conclude this edition of World News. But for more news, update, and commentary, please stay tuned to TVP World.